afternoon, Judge Tott.
Good afternoon, Justice Wiggins.
We thank you for applying and appearing before us, and we're ready for your opening remarks.
All right, thank you, Justice Wiggins, and good afternoon, members of the Nominating Commission. It's a privilege to be here today to discuss my qualifications with each of you. As I've gone through this process over the last several weeks, it's become clear to me that a significant issue that this commission is going to consider is diversity. And I agree wholeheartedly that diversity is a very critical issue for this commission to consider and should consider. But when we look at the qualifications for a Supreme Court justice, I believe the considerations of diversity has to be very broad, has to consider all of the applicants' experiences and background. And in that regard, I think my application sets myself apart from the other applicants. In my professional career, which has spanned the last 27 years, I've had the unique opportunity to be able to serve as a judicial officer for 24 of those years, while at the same time being able to serve in private practice for nearly the same length of time, 24 years, before becoming a district court judge 4 years ago. And that combination of experiences and that diverse nature of my experiences, I believe, sets me apart. I was fortunate to start my judicial career 24 years ago as a tribal court judge with the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska at the age of 27. And in that position, I was able to begin to develop my decision-making and analytical skills as a judicial officer, which are oftentimes different than those skills as a private attorney, which has been very beneficial for me to get an early start in that regard. But more importantly, that experience gave me the opportunity to experience a culture that is totally different from my culture that I was brought up and raised in, and to learn and appreciate the differences between the Native American culture and the white Caucasian culture that I grew up in Sioux City, and to appreciate that their differences are well-founded and deserving and have to be considered when you're making decisions as a judicial officer, whether it be in that context or in any other context. There are always differences of opinion, differences of perspective that have to be considered by a judicial officer in order to do justice, in order to be fair to all litigants. And that gave me an early start and an early appreciation for that fact, having those years of experience early on in the tribal court. And I had the opportunity to put that experience to use right away as a juvenile court judge in Sioux City as well, which I started approximately the same time, shortly after I began as a tribal court judge. And as a juvenile court judge, you deal with a lot of different families, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different nationalities. Sioux City has a very diverse population, a large Native American community, a large Hispanic community, a large and growing Somali community. And as such, you have to appreciate as a judicial officer the values and opinions from those respective communities when you make your decision making. The opportunity I had in Winnebago was invaluable to get me started down that path, and to appreciate that you have to give consideration to all points of view, all perspectives, when you're considering important issues and reaching your ultimate decisions. After juvenile court, or a little overlap is actually, I also served as a magistrate in Woodbury County for 15 years before becoming a district court judge 4 years ago. As a magistrate, you also learn additional experiences and additional skills. Obviously, magistrate court has limited jurisdiction, but you deal with many of the same issues you deal with in district court. But importantly, you deal with a lot of pro se litigants or unrepresented litigants, and you have to learn how to approach cases dealing with them. Again, the greatest skill I learned as a magistrate was patience. With pro se litigants, you have to take your time. You have to give them their opportunity to be heard. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing to a lot of these people is, was I treated fairly or not? Was I been given the opportunity to be heard? And I think that parlays into my experience as a tribal judge and considering different cultures and backgrounds and perspectives, but also having the patience to listen and consider all of those things. And of course, in the last 4 years, I've had the honor and privilege of serving District 3B as a district court judge, where I believe I've put to use those skills I learned over the 24 years. At the same time, I had the unique perspective and unique opportunity to have a private practice as well for 23 years. And in a sense, when you look at it and you combine the two, I've maybe crammed 40 plus years of experience into 27 years. And I think that's a thing that clearly sets me apart from everyone else. When I left Creighton University Law School in 1991, I knew my goal was to become a judicial officer. And so I tried to tailor my practice and my experiences to be as broad as I possibly could. I have a great deal of criminal defense experience, a lot of family law experience, a great deal of juvenile court experience, not only as a juvenile judge, but in private practice as well. Did estate planning, probate work, real estate work, business formations and transactions, to name a few. The one area that I'm probably weak as a private practitioner was civil litigation. I don't try to hide that or deny that. But my last 4 years as a district court judge, I believe, makes up for some of that. I've had several civil jury trials in the last 4 years, dealing with issues ranging from personal injury to contract disputes to other tortious claims, disputes between business owners, the type of things a civil litigator would have done. I've had to deal with as a district court judge, so I think that's helped fill in that gap, perhaps, in my experience as a private attorney. I've also, in that regard, had the opportunity to work in different structures as far as a private practice. When I left law school in 1991, I actually had the privilege of joining Mr. Gray's firm. At that time, it was the Eidsmo firm in Sioux City, and I worked there for 3 years. At that time, it was the largest firm in western Iowa, at least I believe it was. I also, though, have had 15 years of experience as a sole practitioner. Can't get much more divergent than that, and the issues that an attorney faces in those two different contexts. And for the last time before I became a district court judge, I was working in a firm of 3 people. Now, all these diverse experiences and background, I think, prepares me to fulfill all the roles of a Supreme Court justice, whether they be the adjudicative functions with the breadth of my legal experience and background, but also the administrative functions. I come from a rural part of the state. Sioux City is a decent-sized city, but for the most part, Northwest Iowa is rural. When I was born, my family lived in Jackson, Nebraska, which was a town 20 miles west of Sioux City, a population of 200. My grandfather was the town doctor. He went there in 1912 after graduating Creighton Medical School, intending to be there for a year or two and serve 60 years as a town doctor in Jackson. So I have that rural background. On my father's side, my grandfather was working in the packing houses in Sioux City, Swift and Company, became a cattle buyer. My dad, when he left high school at 11th grade to serve in the Marine Corps, after he served, he came back and began in that path, but decided that that wasn't for him. So he opened a service station in 1954, and he's worked there for 40 years until he retired in the mid-90s. I'm proud to say that my brother still operates that service station in the same location. And I know for a fact it's the only full-service station in Sioux City, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's the only full-service service station in the state of Iowa. You can't pump your own gas at Tott's Auto. Someone comes out and pumps it for you. So I have diverse experience in my personal life as well, from having one side of the family in the medical field, the other side working blue collar as you can be in the packing houses and doing automotive repair. I believe my personal and my professional experiences are as diverse as any applicant that's before you. And I think it's that diversity that's important for a Supreme Court justice, to have that background and to be able to relate to everybody and be willing to listen to everybody. And again, I appreciate your giving me this opportunity to appear in front of you and to participate in this process. And I would be very happy to answer any questions if any of you have them for me.
Thank you, Judge Tott. Why don't we start with Mrs. Pearson? You need to take the microphone, Mrs. Pearson.
Sorry. Thank you again for your application and being here today. And you certainly do have a diverse background, a lot of experience. I guess I'm just interested, because I'm not familiar with it, with your tribal judge experience. Is there any one or several examples of experience that you had to deal with in that capacity that you think really helped shape who you are today and your decision making and so forth, that helps define you?
The tribal court is a court of general jurisdiction, so it's very similar in a way to the district court. it's very different in the population it serves. Winnebago is a small reservation, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 residents on the reservation. In that court, there's primarily native litigants, but there could also be non-native if they had dealings on the reservation. In doing that, again, just being able to learn to appreciate the culture and appreciate the fact that because people believe differently than you do doesn't necessarily make it wrong. And I think I've brought that with me, and I think I'm an open person, and I'm willing to hear both sides and to make decisions after being fully informed. It was a very good experience. It was a very challenging experience as well. I can recall a particular situation where on the reservation, like in the state of Iowa, you have to have permits to hunt and things like that. And there were a couple of occasions where non-native people had applied to hunt on reservation lands, and the Winnebago Tribal Code presents the qualifications that you have to meet in order to get those type of permits. And on this particular occasion, the tribal council, for whatever reason, didn't want these people to have a permit, but they met the qualifications. And so I granted the permits and took a lot of flack from the council, but you have to do what the law requires. And so while I appreciate and learned a lot as far as background and respecting other cultures, I also furthered my respect for the law, and you have to follow the law, not political pressure. And I think I've carried that with me.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowden?
Thank you, Mr. Tott. Can you tell me, between your skills and practice as an attorney and now as a district court judge, do you feel that would be beneficial to us as a Supreme Court justice, and why?
Well, obviously there's a big difference between being a judicial officer and being an attorney in private practice. You take sides in private practice. You have to advocate for your client, whether you agree with them or not. You have to do your best you can. As a judicial officer, you put that aside, and in a sense you become a referee, but you also become an arbitrator, and you have to view both positions and understand that both litigants are putting forth the best case they possibly can. So I think learning the different roles that you have to play and being able to assume those roles depending upon the circumstances that you're in. As a Supreme Court justice, you're going to have two roles. You're going to have the role as an arbiter of the law and an adjudicator and deciding cases, but you're also going to be an administrator and have to balance interests and needs of various parts of the state. There's a lot of issues coming down the pike for the Supreme Court as far as on the administrative side. As we all know, the budget every year it seems to get tougher instead of better. And how do we address that? How do we guarantee access to justice to all Iowans? How do we guarantee courthouses in all 99 counties? We have to be able to take on the role that we're dealing with and use those skills for that particular role and be able to shift on the fly. And I think I can do that.
Mr. Berger? Mr. Diaz? Dr. Taylor?
You mentioned being an administrator of law across the state, and one thing that we've kind of talked a little bit off and on today about is access to justice across the state. Have you had any thoughts about how we might bring better access to the rural areas of the state who maybe don't have the same benefits as the more urban areas like Polk County?
Well, I think one factor that's going to play a significant role, and it's just a matter of figuring how it's going to work, is technology. When I was a magistrate, it didn't affect me quite as much as it did the rural magistrates. But court has to be held 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and people who are arrested have to be seen on Saturdays and Sundays. And magistrates oftentimes are sitting on an island by themselves. And if you want a vacation, someone else is going to have to cover for you. Now in Sioux City, it wasn't that difficult. We had two magistrates, and we worked together pretty well. And when we needed coverage, we got coverage for each other. It doesn't work quite as easy in rural counties where there's just one person. So they've worked out a system where they would cover for each other. But that doesn't take away the huge distances. Sometimes you have to travel from one jail to the next on a Saturday and Sunday morning to see people that have been arrested. And so they'd set up a system using Skype and similar technology to allow those rural magistrates to be able to appear and have people who are arrested appear by video. And that way, that's taken away that distance, at least for the judicial officer. Now, another problem, and I've discussed this with a couple of other commission members too, is how about the people that just get a traffic ticket, whether it be in Polk County or whether it be in Sioux City or whether it be in Orange City, a small community. These folks have to appear twice. They come in, they have to plead guilty or not guilty, and then I can't tell you how many times as a magistrate the look I got when I told them, well, we'll see you back in 6 weeks when you have your trial. And they said, we're not getting that done today. Well, sorry, no, we're not getting that done today. Now, technology, certainly should be ways where we can have people appear on the internet and plead not guilty and be given a trial date so they only have to come once, or appear by sending in, like if you want to pay your ticket, you can send it in. Why can't you send in a not guilty plea and appear only one time? So there's got to be ways, and I think technology is going to drive a lot of it to improve access, especially in the rural communities. But we just have to explore and figure out the best ways to do that.
Mr. Bevel?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Sinclair? Ms. Diekma?
Judge Tott, you briefly touched on the matter that you know that as a Supreme Court Justice, part of the job is administrative matters, policy decisions, budgeting, those types of things. Could you just explain to the Commission how your background may have prepared you for those other roles other than just judicial opinions?
Well, my undergraduate degree at Creighton is in business administration, so I have some background in finance and economics and things of that nature from there. I did, again, in my private practice, a fair amount of business formation and business transactional type of work, which again allowed me to exercise some of the skills I learned in undergraduate work. And to manage a solo practitioner firm, you got to do all the budgeting, all the checks writing and payments, and figuring all those things out on your own. So I did that over 15 plus years as well. Growing up with a dad who ran his own business, I also saw how he handled it. And so I have various perspectives and ideas to handle at least budgetary issues. Working in larger firms too, I had a significant support staff when I was at Heidman. I had a paralegal and a secretary that I was able to work with and manage. As a district court judge, I have a court reporter and some other staff I have to help manage and work with too and balance. So I think I have some background in those areas of management, of handling, managing people as well as managing budgets, and I think I can put those skills to work and use that to help in those areas.
Thank you.
Mr. Sukup?
Thank you. When we had the chance to visit, found it interesting that you've been through the Nominating Commission twice in Nebraska.
Correct.
And finalist. And so, any comparisons to the two systems?
That, of course, was on the district court level, and it was very similar, except in the nominating commissions in Nebraska don't have a limit on the number of people they can send through. If there are 10 applicants, theoretically, they can send 10 finalists to the governor. Now, in my two occasions that I applied for district court vacancies, and it was in the 6th district in Nebraska, which is Dakota, right on the border, right where I grew up, they only sent 2. So it was in the end, it was very similar to in Iowa, that only 2 out of the, and I was glad I was one of the 2 that got to go, because if I hadn't, I guess that meant I wasn't qualified. But it was very similar. And then the opportunity to speak with and meet with the governor, which was Dave Heineman at that time. My first time through was very interesting in that I was always told that once you meet the governor, if the phone call comes and it's from the governor, that's a good sign. And the first time I applied, I went and met with Governor Heineman and thought the interview went very well. And 29 or 30 days later, however it was, 7:45 in the morning in my office, a call comes from Government Services, and I picked up the phone thinking this has got to be it. And lo and behold, it was Dave Heineman on the phone. And initial reaction is, I can't believe this. I'm going to be selected. And his immediate response to me was, well, Pat, I'm calling you personally because I was impressed with you, and I want to make sure you apply in the future, but unfortunately I have to tell you, you're not the one. And of course that was heartbreaking, but after I had time to reflect upon it, the fact that he took it upon himself to make that kind of phone call gave me the encouragement to continue and to continue to apply. So I have to say that was very interesting in my opinion, but thank you for bringing that up.
Mr. Goodman?
Judge Tott, thank you for your application, and thank you for your service on the various benches that you've served.
Thank you.
I'd like to know, in any of those capacities, have any of your decisions been appealed to the Supreme Court? And if so, what have you taken away from that experience? And I'd like to add to that the question, how important do you think it is for the candidates that we consider for this position to have served in a trial court capacity?
Well, as a magistrate, I don't believe probably anything was appealed that far. I know I had some matters appealed to the district court level and resolved. As a juvenile court judge, practically every termination of parental rights decision was appealed to the Court of Appeals. I'm not aware of any of them making it to the Supreme Court. As a district court judge, I know there have been several appeals, and my record has been pretty good. I've had a few minor things, like last week I had to re-sentence an individual who was a minor at the time of the offense, but I sentenced him when I first went on the bench in 2014, and so the case law and the guidance from the Supreme Court hadn't been fully developed, and so we had to re-sentence him to consider the new factors in Roby and things like that. I've had trivial reverse and remands for things like I didn't use the Benson formula for a property division in a dissolution case, and I had attempted, at least I thought I was attempting to equalize the entire property division by being a little bit creative with the pension and splitting it 46% and 54% instead of 50-50, but the Court of Appeals disagreed with me, and so I fixed it and made it 50-50. The only decision I can think of that of any significance that was reversed, and I don't believe it was at the Supreme Court level, but it was the Court of Appeals level, had to do with a sexually violent predator and what it constitutes being in custody or not being in custody at the time of the redetermination of his committal. Court of Appeals disagreed with my decision there, but otherwise my track record with the Court of Appeals has been very good in my 4 years, and I'm proud of my record on appeal.
Thank you.
Mr. Bloom?
Well, just a quick comment and question. You have a pretty excellent academic record beginning in high school on, and you haven't really talked too much about the research and writing requirement in the Court of Appeals. If you would just address your thoughts on that.
Well, obviously, a huge skill that a Supreme Court justice has to have is the ability to write. And I'm proud that in law school I received the American Jurisprudence Award for Research and Writing at Creighton. I believe my writing skills are good. I think sometimes what Supreme Court justices need to try and focus on, and all due respect to Justice Wiggins, is maybe to try to make our opinions a little bit shorter and a little bit more concise and understandable, especially for lay people. I think the quality of writing on our Supreme Court today is excellent. It's just a little bit long. And I find myself sometimes when I read these decisions that I have to go back and read them again, and I've got 27 years of experience, and so I don't quite know how lay people are going to understand some of them. But at the same time, I understand you have to be analytical and you have to be complete and you have to be thorough, and sometimes that dictates the length of opinions. But I would make every effort to try and make my opinions as concise and self-explanatory as possible while being thorough and complete. And I understand that can be a challenge, and I just would try and do my best, because I think it's important not only that attorneys understand what the Supreme Court has said, but it's also important that the public at large understand what's going on and what's being said and done. And so I would work very hard to try and do that in my opinion writing.
Thank you.
Mr. Conover? Mrs. Roberts? Mrs. O'Brien? Mr. Horvath? He was your partner, so
I knew Mr. Gray
I
was
knew
going
you
to
had
get
to have
me.
a question.
Of course I do, and
You
I'm
only
also,
got 1 minute, John.
okay,
He's
I'm also
my
his
next-
next door neighbor.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
My dog doesn't bark that much, I promise you.
how old are the triplets?
The triplets just turned 8.
So, how is being the father of 3 rather energetic triplets, how would that help you be on the Iowa Supreme Court?
Well, John, you're forgetting my 6-year-old and you're forgetting my 11-year-old as well.
They behave.
And they're well, I don't know about the 6-year-old, but they are very energetic, and they do take up a commitment. I'm very proud of my family. I'm very proud of my wife. My triplets were born at 30 weeks. They were born premature, and they spent 42 days in the NICU when they were born. And they have, developmental issues, but my wife has worked so hard over the last 8 years getting them to therapy appointments, physical, occupational, speech therapy, that if you saw these kids today, you wouldn't know it. They have come so far, and that's to the from my wife's efforts. Obviously, I'm working, I do what I can, but she's the one taking them to all these appointments. I try to be active in their activities. I try coaching their baseball, I'm coaching their basketball. So I try very hard to balance the interests as a father and as a professional, and I think I've done a good job of that, and I think where my family is today shows that. But I appreciate very much that question, because my family is very important to me.
Thank you, Judge Tott. We appreciate your appearance today and wish you best of luck.
Thank you very much, and thank you all.
Be-